You are listening to the Circulation Desk with Mina Leazer. So welcome back to the Circulation Desk. This is a podcast where I just try to reframe, re-envision what the life of a librarian is like. I'm new to the profession, only 2 years in. After 2 years of grad school, you do have to get a master's in library science to become a certified librarian. But there have been so many misconceptions and so many things that I wish people knew that I also just see in Hollywood, the typical stereotypical librarian is just, oh gosh, I can't stand the image. They've got the cat eye glasses. They have cats, they're old ladies, they're spinsters, they're shushing everyone. And okay, so I'll admit I have cats, but that is just not what it's about. So I just use this podcast to kind of reframe what being a librarian in the modern age looks like. I'll be honest, I am coming to being a school librarian after 20 plus years in the classroom as a teacher. I was a French teacher, an ESL teacher. I taught abroad, I taught children, I taught adults, I've done it all. And I kind of thought going into the library was going to be this nice kind of, I called it my early retirement. I was like, oh, this is great. I'm surrounded by books. It's a lot quieter. And it was just as this whole national debate around librarians being put in jail, librarians being sued, librarians being called groomers, like that just came to the forefront as I started my career. And I'm like, oh, this is not going to be a retirement at all. And if anything, have gone in my last 2 years from being like, okay, let's, try this like late career move to really feeling fired up about people need to understand the importance of why they need libraries and librarians, and that we are just literally not sitting around with books and shushing people all day. So that's kind of the point. The Circulation Desk is, obviously the place where I spend a good portion of my day. And it's also a place where I have been totally transformed in my understanding of what the day-to-day would be like. And I often joke that my job is like, in Peanuts, when Lucy's got that little stand and it says the doctor is in, 5 cents. I've got the number of queries that come through my circulation desk in a given day. I mean, you really just never know what you're going to get. I would say maybe 10% are about books, and the other 90% is just about life information, facts. Like, people are asking all sorts of things. And so I hope that through the course of this podcast, I don't know, people will just get a different idea about what librarianing is, and why I chose to do it and why I believe so fiercely in it. So I don't have a guest today. Normally I plan to have guests, but we're actually technically on summer break. So here's another fun fact, is that school librarians, particularly in New York City, are considered teachers. And I think that's so important to note, because I am always ready and willing to teach, and that's like the hardest thing that I have to broadcast, is that, hey, teachers, like I could come into your classroom, you could bring your classes here. Like, I am a licensed educator and I want to teach your classes. I consider my lessons to be those little like odds and ends that you wish you could teach about, the things that I spent most of my career trying to like insert in, because I just thought they were too fascinating not to talk about. And as such, as an educator, that also means I get summers off. So a lot of people will ask in June as they're packing up to leave, like, oh, are you going to be here all summer? Like, no, ma'am, no, sir. I am home. I'm on break. But once the school year starts in earnest, I do live in the library, and I invite all kinds of requests. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about was one of my inspirations to become a librarian. Obviously, it was from previous librarians, but as I started my graduate courses, I came across a works progress administration program called the Packhorse Library Project, and basically otherwise known as the Packhorse Librarians of Kentucky. They're the most famous ones, sometimes called the Packhorse Librarians of Appalachia. And what's really badass about these librarians is, like, the first thing I encountered was the picture. So it's a whole, I guess, cadre of women, and I think there's one man at the end, if I'm not mistaken, who were hired during the Great Depression to become horseback riders who distributed books on their little saddlebags in the very rural areas of Appalachia, particularly in Kentucky, to just share books. And the crazy thing is, as I was researching a little bit more about it, it wasn't even that they carried like all the books on the horses. It was almost like this underground railroad of books, like a network of books. So books would be stored in churches, in grocery stores, in common meeting places, in town halls, and then the librarians would be used to kind of just like transit these books from point A to point B. And not only that, a very interesting fact about Appalachia is that not a lot of people could read. And so if you go to the Kentucky State Digital Archives, there are these amazing pictures of like people that are bedridden even, and the librarian is inside the person's room and they are like reading a magazine or a newspaper, a book, like out loud to these patrons. And I just feel like this is such a embodiment of the spirit of librarianship, is that it's, sure, I'm, the books are a part of it, and I'm sure it couldn't have worked without the books, but it's more this idea of access. And that was one of the key concepts we talked a lot about in grad school, was that, the state of information is changing. I just got an article from a coworker where, it was kind of lamenting and bemoaning the fact that a lot of libraries are moving away from books, which is, honestly a trend that's happening right now, that the physical book is a little less prominent in newer libraries, and they're kind of becoming more of these digital commons areas, or, kind of what you might picture at a student union at a college. And, a lot of people fear this because they're like, oh no, we're not, we don't have physical books. And I'm not knocking books at all. I think the physical book, if anything, I think there's going to be a comeback to it because we've gone so digital. And I can speak anecdotally to that later. But I do definitely stand behind the importance of books, but books as a means to access to information. It's about equal access to just the written word, to information, to knowledge, to wisdom. And so librarians, as wisdom keepers and as people that want to make sure this information is equally distributed to all patrons, is kind of what makes being a librarian so amazing and so awesome. And I know there's a lot of talk about librarians kind of promoting their ideologies, or I don't know, just like this whole talk about being groomers. And I think that's so it's so misleading, because basically librarians are essentially doing the opposite, is they're opening the floodgates to any kind of information you could possibly want. We want you to be able to access that. And it was really interesting because there was a course during my library science degree days about those ethical issues of if you're noticing someone who has visible scarring on their body, and they're checking out books about self-harm and cutting, and do we house these books, or how do we deal with that? Or if we notice someone is like checking out literally all the titles we have on terrorists and how to make bombs, or are these books even supposed to be in the library? And it was really thought-provoking. Like, we're thinking about these things, we're having the conversations, and we're not trying to censor, but we're also not trying to be the gatekeepers of that information. The idea is we are just providing the access. And, I provided two very bad examples, but on the opposite end, right? Think about the national kind of rhetoric right now. There's a real pushback on LGBTQIA plus titles, and it's dangerous. Like, it's dangerous because there are kids that are exploring their identity, their sexuality, and like literally have no one else to talk to. And sometimes that book that they're able to get is the one book that might, give them some insight, help them to sort through some of the things that they are personally questioning. And I really believe that it's important to not block access to information. And there's this great poem that I saw in, I think it's, I can't remember the name of the museum now. I think it's the Word Museum in DC, but it really, it's so long and it's actually not completely school appropriate. So that's why I haven't done this, but I wanted to make it into a decal for my library. It's from a longer poem. And I'm just trying to find the title of it, but it's basically, If Librarians Were Honest. And it is a poem by, I don't know if I'm going to find the name of the person. I'll update that later. But listen to this quote. If librarians were honest, they wouldn't smile or act welcoming. They would say, you need to be careful. Here be monsters. They would say these rooms house heathens and heretics, murderers and maniacs, the deluded, the desperate, and dissolute. They would say these books contain knowledge of death, desire and decay, betrayal, blood, and more blood. Each is a Pandora's box. So why would you want to open one? They would post danger signs warning that contact might result in mood swings, severe changes in vision, and mind-altering effects. And it goes on. There's some not maybe suitable for school, but I still think really thought-provoking lines in that poem. And I think about that a lot. And so I think when people get upset with librarians, what they're really getting upset with is the literature. And that's kind of why we read. That's kind of why we share information, because we challenge one another's worldviews through what we write and through how we communicate to one another. And so it's like this misguided kind of anger that really what you're mad at is the information, or that you're mad at the fact that something is shaking your worldview. And I think it's a healthy thing to have your worldview shaken, because here is where totalitarian regimes come into being, right? When you're not allowed to have any other worldview but your own, or when you're not allowed, you only can believe one thing. And how the beauty of being a human is that we get to think about so many different things, and particularly the beauty of America and being in this pluralistic society is that we get to have all these kinds of different thoughts. And I can't imagine having to live somewhere where you're only allowed to have one type of thought, or the thoughts that you want to have in earnest, you have to keep secret. And so, all this to cycle back to when I first saw that image of the Packhorse Librarians of Kentucky, I was like, this seems transformative and life-changing, and something I want to invest my life into. And so that's kind of a little bit about the inspiration of what made me want to become a librarian. So I totally did not expect to spend so much of episode 1 talking about the Packhorse Librarians of Kentucky. I actually had a few more items, but I think we're going to table that for some future episodes. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed listening to the first episode of the Circulation Desk, where we will talk about all things library related. Hopefully, we'll get some more interviews on deck as the year begins in earnest. But if you have any ideas, please leave them in the comment section or reach out to me. And thanks so much for listening.